So hello to everybody. You might be in different time zones. My name is Sujata Visaria. I'm the director of the HKUST Center for Economic Policy and also an associate professor in the Department of Economics in the business school there. And I'm very happy to welcome all of you today here to this online workshop. I'll just say a few words about the purpose or why we thought it was a good idea to organize this workshop, and then I'll hand it over to Professor Albert Park, who will make some opening remarks. So you might know that the Asia-Pacific region is a major source of international migrants, and quite a few of them actually migrate to destinations within Asia, where they predominantly work in short-term formal contracts that involve low-skilled work. So that their remittances really are an important source of income for their families and could potentially also be financing increases in education, improvements in health, as well as socioeconomic mobility. And there is some evidence that this takes place, this happens. However, we also know that there are multiple challenges where migrants are vulnerable to economic pressures. They often end up in debt. There is a lack of job security, and they might even be exploited by unscrupulous lenders as well as recruiters, which obviously leads to the question, what kinds of interventions can be used to help them? But I think it's important to recognize that the interventions that we design or the programs that we plan need to be grounded in the actual realities of these migrants and take into account both the constraints that they face as well as the opportunities that are available to them, which is why we thought it was a good idea to hold an event like this, where we bring together researchers who often are digging quite deeply into understanding their circumstances, as well as nonprofits and policymakers and digital service providers as well, given the new opportunities that digital technologies have opened up, so that we can design both programs that can address the actual issues that they face, as well as think about new research explorations that might be helpful. And we think this is especially a good time for the Center for Economic Policy and the Asian Development Bank to be co-hosting an event such as this, because the ADB is about to launch a new technical assistance project called Remittances for Inclusive Development, Improving Data and Analysis on Financial Literacy and Inclusion of Migrants and their families. And it's focused on specific Southeast Asian countries and is being led by Aiko, Kikkawa, who is also here, who will be speaking very soon as well. So before we go into the presentations, I'd like to thank Albert Park, who is the Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank, and also invite him to make some opening remarks.
Thanks, Sujata. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this workshop on digital solutions for financial empowerment of overseas migrants in Asia, which is co-hosted by Asian Development Bank and HKUST Center for Economic Policy. This event is close to my heart, especially I used to be the director of the HKUST Center for Economic Policy, so I'm really close to both of the co-sponsoring institutions. So Asia and the Pacific is a region of origin for 93 million international migrants, which comprise about 1/3 of the global total. Southeast Asia hosts hotspots of international and cross-border labor migration flows, including 2.2 million overseas workers from the Philippines alone in 2019. Labor mobility in the region is mostly temporary and secular, motivated by economic motives. Migrants send an average of $75 billion worth of remittances annually to Southeast Asia in the past 5 years. And remittance inflows to the Philippines alone reached $36.2 billion in 2021, which was equivalent to 9.4% of GDP. Remittances help alleviate poverty by improving the welfare of vulnerable families in migrant source countries, many of whom are poor or relatively poor. Remittances are often used to finance food and other daily needs, education, housing, and help insure households against adverse economic shocks. At the macro level, we know that remittances help stabilize the balance of payments and thus could be a driver of economic growth. remittance inflows have proven to be quite resilient in times of crisis, and in particular during the coronavirus disease pandemic. Despite all this, the benefits of remittances often are not fully maximized or optimized to most effectively improve the well-being of migrants and their families, or support the economy as a whole. Often, only limited funds are allocated towards savings and productive capital, including agricultural technologies and small businesses that could promote long-term growth. In the Philippines, only 32% of remittance receiving households allocate any money towards savings and financial assets. There are also patterns of conspicuous consumption rather than productive investment. The persistently low levels of savings and investment, coupled with the prevalence of heavy indebtedness, pose a challenge to migrants upon their return and reintegration to their home countries, which may lead to unintended extensions of migration duration, which can exacerbate the social costs of migration, including family disruptions, absent parents, and the spread of a culture of dependency. The low level of financial literacy, communication, and inclusion among migrants and their families, as well as prevailing gender norms, are constraints to promoting physical and human capital investment and building other productive assets. In the Philippines, only 18% of remittance receiving households in the lowest 40% of the income distribution have bank accounts. Many migrants and their family members continue to have limited knowledge of basic budgeting or financial planning, not to mention lacking access to information to make informed investment choices. Lack of communication and hesitancy to even discuss financial matters among family members make it difficult to set and achieve common saving and investment goals. Financial inclusion remains a challenge among recipient families in rural areas with limited availability and access to financial services. Now, governments have ongoing policy responses to promote financial literacy and inclusion, even among migrant communities. However, such programs often are in the form of very simple briefing sessions, the effectiveness of which is not that well understood or researched. The results of limited but well-structured randomized control trials suggest that financial literacy and inclusion programs can increase the level of knowledge among migrants and impact actual saving and investment levels, including encouraging financial communication and planning among transnational families and/or introducing the intervention at the initial stage of migration. Financial literacy and inclusion programs can promote financial inclusion by connecting migrants to financial institutions and financial products and facilitating access to entrepreneurial skills and training, as well as business services and related technology. These findings call for more trials and evaluations of possible interventions. Initiatives also are required to scale up such efforts in the future and test their applicability to broader environments. Digitalization of financial services also has great potential for these groups by reducing costs, increasing convenience, access, and transparency. There are still very large gaps in our knowledge that need to be filled to better understand what works and does not work in this context of the digital financial services. Now, given all of this background, ADB is planning to launch a new research program promoting financial literacy and inclusion among migrant workers in Southeast Asia. The program will involve extensive surveys, impact evaluations of interventions, and other policy-relevant quantitative and qualitative studies in collaboration with governments, research partners, and NGOs. One of the key focuses of the program is to shed light on the role of digital technology that can push the frontiers in these areas. And so we're very delighted to partner with HKUST's Center for Economic Policy in this initiative. We hope that this two-day online workshop, which brings together leading researchers, NGOs, and digital service providers, will serve as a good opportunity to share ongoing experiences that could inform how we address the challenge of financial empowerment. And so I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about the insights and past work that can inform future intervention design and research exploration. I'm very much looking forward to your active discussion and participation, and I think this type of dialogue can really play a valuable role in furthering the design of our project, and then hopefully eventually the design of programs that can really help the well-being of migrants and their families. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Albert. So let's get started. The format is going to be each speaker will have 20 minutes, and I'm hoping you will spend about 15 minutes presenting, and then we'll have 5 minutes for question and answer. We have several attendees who are not here, they're not in the panel, but they're available on a different list, and you will be welcome to send in questions through the Q&A if you have any. So let's get started. Our first speaker today is Aiko Kikkawa. Aiko is an economist in the Economic Research and Cooperation Department of the ADB. She is based here in Manila. She handles the research portfolio on international migration and remittances, aging, and demographic change, and also analyzes ADB projects in social sectors. So yes, she's sharing her screen. You need to make it so that we only see the slideshow view. Aiko, yeah, yes, perfect. Great, Aiko. Go ahead. You're muted, Aiko.
Oh, there you go. Sorry. There was some bouncing. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, thank you very much, Sujata, for your introduction. And also, I also welcome participants for this event. And it's really grateful to host this event as the first event before we really fully introduce a bigger remittance project. So what I would hope to do here as a way to sort of kick off our discussion on the role of a digital solution for financial empowerment of the migrant workers. I'm sharing our work done together with ILO and OECD last year on what we call a Migtech. So during the COVID especially, we have seen that many part of migration process and also the practice of migrants in sending monies have been digitalized, and that has brought a lot of quite a groundbreaking change in how this whole industry is being reshaped. So we try to map different kind of migration technology, as we call it Migtech, and to see how and what we know about it and what we know in terms of its effectiveness or implication to the migrants' well-being. So what we have here is that, so Migtech, what we meant by that is that it's a technology that facilitates migration and bring a lot of efficiencies, also accuracy, safeties, and transparency to the whole process of migration. And what we have done, and we will show you step by step, is to look at how different technology has been gradually introduced in the 3 stages of migration, be it pre-departure, post-arrival, and reintegration. And that the way financial well-being actually stretch over to these 3 stages, that we will show you how different types of digital engagement migrants have in this process as something that might be helpful when we think about digital intervention to reach out to migrants. So just to talk a little bit about how the migrants have access to the technology. The sort of big comprehensive picture is scant, but the available info suggests that migrants are very close to technologies. So this is a little bit outdated, but we wish we have that for post-pandemic, but we can fairly comfortably assume that the majority of migrants do have access to available information on the online platform and different services through their smartphone. And that, for example, the latest information shows that about up to 96% of the Filipinos who are the highest users of Facebook has a smartphone among the migrant workers. Or that about a survey in Malaysia shows that migrants from South and Southeast Asia, up to 92% of them own mobile phone, and about 3 out of 5 of them own smartphones. So you would see that the ownership is quite high, and we believe that the rate has much gone up over the during the pandemic, where smartphone plays an essential role in facilitating every aspect of life. However, it's also important to note that the type of access that migrants have with this smartphone-based service has to be contextualized into very special characteristics. So deeper study shows that migrants prefer, low data usage, meaning that their phones are not always connected, or that it's like on-demand access. So they would not require 24-hour connection to minimize on their data load. It's also clear that the migrants do not have the top-notch or the latest model of smartphone, meaning that they might have limited capacity to download new applications, or that they will be hesitant to try out different apps because that would clog their smartphone, which does not have enough memory or running capacity. So we need to be mindful of these special situations when providing different digital services, including financial empowerment tools to migrants. So as I mentioned, we have mapped different technologies by different stages of migration, and here are quick summaries of this. And let me start by some pre-departure stage, which compose of 2 stages. One is pre-employment, where migrants would make decision based on available information, whether or not to migrate. So at this moment, they're more like searching for the informations on what are the available job opportunities, or they might be actually going to get the necessary skill so that they can apply for specific jobs. And here we would see that the increasing numbers of different training facilities, for example, went online, and that many of the service providers have very much increased their digital content to help migrants make decisions. And when it comes to the actual pre-departure preparatory stage, this is where we see a very rapid digitalization, especially during the COVID, where many of the government have transitioned into online platform to apply for exit permit, or that the permission to work abroad, which many countries in origin do in the Asian context, or that the providing certificate for their type of jobs, and so on. And at the post-arrival stage, we would also see a great number of different digital services really promoting their smooth integrations, or to acclimatization to the local context. For example, we have seen a large take-up of the language applications that migrants use to the local language that they come into. And also, interestingly, more host government really started to put invest more into their digital platform in the language of the migrants, to give them information about the laws, update of their policies, which become very important during the COVID, and information about the different legal provisions. What's also particular, which then also very much relates to the empowerment of the migrants, is that there are increasing use of digital reporting system about the conditions of work, either to the countries of origin, countries of destinations, or even the employers or the contractor of the firm where migrants are employed. So this is more to do with the monitoring of the supply chains, etc. But more companies are introducing this application so that migrants are able to, make a claim or lodge in case their labor rights are under threat. And this is where we are most interested in, addressing a remittance cost and financial inclusions. And actually, some of the participants are from these institutions, including Sabre Asia. We have a presentation, but we have seen that the digital services for remittances and transfers have been have increased the take up, and that it's not just about the transferring, but the kind of services has very much extended over the years, including the electronic and mobile banking, digital wallet, digital mobile cash, and other tools to, for example, compare the cost of remittances or different opportunities for the foreign exchanges rate. So this platform has really mushroomed over, especially during the COVID, where migrants are increasing their have an opportunity where they wish to compare costs. And again, as I mentioned, the migrants are able to report. I mentioned that migrants are able to report their work-related issues, and that it also cascades to different NGOs who are supporting migrant workers, and there are various report and also evidence where these migrants are able to lodge complaint, especially in a critical situation, with a rescue service from the migrant help organization through different information tools. And maybe return and integration, I would skip, but we also see that some government have introduced much more system to monitor the return, which is the last sort of missing statistics in the migration, where countries struggle to collect. So they have introduced some statistical portal where migrants can register for their return, which also, have an incentive of claiming some reintegration fund and so on through online platform. So as we evaluated and also went through about over a dozen, actually about 50 or 60 different, Migtechs over, we actually find a very little impact statement from these services. They are very good, note of case studies, or that the comment or the report from the migrants of that, that rating the services, but not necessarily more in the quantitative or even the, a descriptive type of statistics indicating how effective those tools are. And but the overall, here are some of the areas qualitatively we see where migrant, this Migtech has been empowering and helping the passage of migration more humane, and also empowering experience for migrants. One is on the access to information, that where migration have sort of used to be just knowing from your middleman telling what are the opportunities. They have much more greater awareness of what are the risks and opportunity, thanks to different information they could get either from the personal or the online information. And secondly, these Migtech performance services result in a better understanding of their rights, and rights, and also the way to advocate and also to manifest those rights in term, and also lodge a grievance, and that gives a greater confidence and willingness to access justice. We also see that Migtech facilitates social cohesion, integration, being able to manage their transnational lives, and also information that are basic to the destination countries more accessible, which then leads to the overall, social and economic empowerment through those technologies. And through this assessment, we also see that the sort of upcoming opportunities and that the possible risk or challenges that needs to be overcome. And maybe these are some type of issues that we could discuss during today's and tomorrow's session. One is the very much the critical role that the digital identities and blockchain technologies are now playing in the remittance transfer and access to social services. So as you see, like India's case of Aadhaar, having a digital identity help bridge the last mile solution of the remittances, where migrant family can claim remittances even if they do not have a bank account or any previous financial association with the financial institutions. And that we also see that I think this is also relevant to the researcher, that we have much better access to big data through usage of these services. So there could be a big potential there to be gained. However, there are big issues as challenges that we need to go through. One is this first about this measuring and assessing effectiveness. Because when we interview these service provider, what we come very clear is that they also have a lot of difficulty because these services are often reached in anonymous situations. So knowing who are your client makes it difficult unless you're a remittance service provider or something where you have a clear identity established. So many of the other services do not, which then prohibit them from having a good measurement of the assessment of ongoing practice. And also, there is a continued digital divide. The fact that we assume that most of the migrants have access or the mobile phone doesn't really mean that they have sufficient digital literacy or even the financial literacy to navigate the flow of information, not to mention the actual understanding of the technology use. So we really need to look at this digital divide as an important component when we discuss the financial literacy and the role of the digital tool. And there will be other issues such as data privacy and security risks, which many migrants would perhaps not consider too seriously when they're maybe using some of the applications, but this might come into risks. And we see that there also a lot of evidence of this digital platform being used to support irregular migration, and that those interfaces have to be considered quite closely. And so this is just summarizes our report in terms of then what does it mean for the policies. So we are very aware from this Migtech mapping that digital literacy are essential for migrants to navigate through their migration journey. So this has to be built into different interventions, including the pre-departure orientation for migrants. And we also see that the inclusivity in design and systems are important. These technology try to achieve different objectives, and sometimes the perspective of migrants and the different stakeholders do not obviously match, and which makes the accessibility and the user friendliness of these services would degrade. So this inclusivity in designs are important. And thirdly, we see interesting technology initiatives are developing, especially in the private sector. And those initiative really has to be fostered in partnership because, for example, with the migrant organization to receive their feedback on the type of services, but sometimes creating this kind of ecosystem are not necessarily sort of a self-grown, and they might need some external support. And some UN organizations, donor agencies are doing it, and this is the kind of initiative that we need to continuously support. And other policies recommendations include greater data collections, and also reduction in the different types of regulatory restrictions, which seem to be also still quite prevalent, especially in the financial market, which might then prevent further innovation from making into the product that benefits the workers. So that's the recommendation. And if you're interested in the more about the different types of technology that we looked into and how they see the effectiveness of those measures, you can look at this report. I hope these discussions are helpful. It's not precisely about the financial technology, but there are lots of technologies are used to make the migration journeys, and how we can intervene in the on the side of financial literacy, have to take those all into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aiko. There are 3 different questions that we have, and maybe what I'll do is I'll just read them all out to you, and then, or maybe you can also see them on Zoom, but I'll just tell you what they are. So one question is actually something you may have kind of tangentially mentioned, which is how much time or with what frequency do migrants spend with what frequency do migrants use these language and mobile NGO apps? It's not clear that they're actually used after they're installed. So that's one question. Another question is, what did you find is the role of empowerment and NGO and education by NGOs in the receiving countries, perhaps vis-a-vis in other in the destination, perhaps? And another question is vis-a-vis the digital divide, are there initiatives to teach the poorest or the illiterate workers how to access technologies or to provide them with smartphones? You're muted again, Aiko. Yeah.
Okay, let me start with the first question. So this is precisely the kind of issue that I raised, anonymity, and that the developer of the app have difficulty tracing. But what we, as I talk to some of these developers, it seems like some download, but usage are substantially lower, precisely for the reason that I mentioned. They do not have well-functioning or high-capacity smartphone to use those services very often. So, maybe more suggestion would be to really, integrate those services to the existing service so that they do not have to load up. I think some of the platform organization provide these information on how much they spend on different applications, and that the migrants do seem to spend quite a lot of time on those applications, which are more like SNS type. So maybe it's not a straight answer, but the use of app we see a little bit more discouraging than encouraging, precisely from the reason of the mobile phone capacity that they have.
Mm-hmm.
Second question, so I do not have a very good information on the financial literacy from the receiving side, which I think we would learn much more from today's presenter, especially a group based in Hong Kong and so on, today and tomorrow's sessions. I very much look forward to that. And about the digital divide, I think so where the migrants receive essential services is very much concentrated in just a few hours to 1 day of pre-departure orientation. Unless otherwise, migrants are lucky to find some NGOs or group who are offering extra services or training to the migrants. We do not see those aspects being very much strengthened. So what we hope to do with the new project is to work with some of the government to really integrate this component of digital literacy and also the financial literacy into pre-departure orientation, so that at least some sensitization would go in, and perhaps additional material which they can look up to when they arrive at the destination.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Aiko. That was a really stimulating presentation. In the interest of time, let's keep going. So I'll invite now Fenella Carpena to perhaps share your screen, Fenella, while I introduce you. Fenella is an associate professor in the business school at Oslo Metropolitan University. She is an applied microeconomist with a special focus on development economics, and she has a PhD in economics from the University of California, Berkeley. And she will be presenting her joint work with Bilal Zia at the World Bank on the causal mechanism of financial education.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me in this online workshop. As Sujata has mentioned, my name is Fenella Carpena, and I currently work as a professor at the Oslo Business School in Norway. On a personal note, I'm actually also Filipino. I grew up in the Philippines, and in my own family, we have there have been migrant workers who have sent remittances to the family in the past. And so kind of the topic of today's workshop, which is about financial empowerment of migrants, is something that's important to me, not just from an academic interest perspective, but also from a personal perspective. So today I'm going to talk about a project which I've worked on with Bilal Zia at the World Bank, where we basically look at what are the mechanisms through which financial education impacts financial outcomes. And so the project was not specifically for migrant workers, but hopefully through this project, we can learn something about the pathways through which financial behavior can be changed through financial education. So as we've heard from the opening remarks, and also as we're probably going to talk about more today, financial education programs have become a very popular policy tool for financial empowerment. And there's a large and growing literature on whether these programs work, and also what delivery methods work best. So we know a lot about, what are the impacts of these programs, and also how best we can deliver them. But if we look at this literature, the evidence is actually quite complete. And the reason is because we know much less about the mechanisms through which financial education affects financial behavior. And so basically the question is, what are the pathways through which financial education influences financial outcomes? And in this particular paper, we're going to look at changes in financial knowledge as a particular mechanism. And so with that in mind, there are two things that we are doing in this paper. The first is to try to understand how we should conceptualize financial knowledge and how it should be measured, especially when we're working with populations that are from developing countries. And so what we are going to argue in this paper, and what I'll talk about in more detail later, is that for sample, or when we're working with populations from developing countries, it's important to conceptualize financial knowledge into different aspects of knowledge. So we're going to look at numeracy, which is basically kind of mathematical skills and whether you can calculate interest rates. The second is about awareness, which is basically whether you are aware about certain financial products and tools. And then the last is about attitudes, which are how your perspectives or beliefs about the benefits of different financial services and tools. And with these three dimensions of financial knowledge, we're then going to ask to what extent each of these dimensions actually mediate the impact of financial education. So another way of saying that is basically, when we look at the impact of financial education, what proportion of those impacts can be attributed to changes in financial numeracy, changes in financial awareness, or changes in financial attitudes. And so just to give a preview of what we find, we basically find that numeracy doesn't mediate any of the effects of financial education. When we look at financial behaviors that are what we would call more simple financial behaviors, in the sense that there's not that many barriers to taking up those behaviors, like writing a budget, it seems our results show that awareness and attitudes seem to be equally important. But when we look at more complex financial behaviors, such as opening a bank savings account, it seems that only attitudes play a mediating role. And so, as I said, our first question is basically, how should financial literacy be measured, financial knowledge be measured in developing countries. And so one way to think about this question is to look at what the current standard, or what is kind of the measure that a lot of academics and policymakers have used. And that standard is basically what is called the big three questions that have been proposed by Anna Maria Lusardi and co-author. And so these questions are basically about like interest rates, inflation, and diversification. So basically, if you have, $100 now and the interest rate is a certain amount, how much money will you have in 5 years? And then it also asks, if you have savings in an account and it's a certain rate, and inflation is also a certain rate, how much money will you have after 1 year? And then diversification, which is about, is it better to buy stock from one company or a mutual fund? So if you look at these questions, which is kind of like the standard, it kind of becomes clear that these questions are not so appropriate in settings like developing countries, where there's many different barriers to access to different financial services, and also different levels of education. So one advantage of using the big three is that they're quite parsimonious and they're easy to implement. But what we're arguing is that it's quite a limited measure in developing country context. As I said, because there's limited access to financial services, lack of trust in institutions, etc. And the authors themselves write that it's important to expand the range of financial measures because it allows us to evaluate the different types of problems that people find that are most difficult. And so what we do is to break down this idea of financial knowledge into the three aspects that I talked about. So financial numeracy is the ability to do basic arithmetic to solve financial problems. So inevitably, when users have to make financial decisions, they're gonna have to do some calculation. And so, for example, they might have to add income or expenses for their household, or they might have to compare interest rates from two different sources. And then, as I mentioned, financial awareness is about how much knowledge you have about basic financial products and tools, or whether you're aware about those details. So for example, in our context in India, they could open a bank account for as low as $1, and so $1. So do they know that that's a possibility for them? And then the last is basically about financial attitudes, or their perspectives about the benefits of financial products. And so, for example, do they believe that writing a budget is helpful? And so even though kind of attitudes are not kind of knowledge per se, we believe that it's kind of an important component of knowledge, to the extent that if you don't have positive views about savings, for example, then you're going to be less likely to save. And so we're going to explore these three dimensions of financial knowledge that we propose as potential pathways through which financial education might impact financial behavior. And so our second question is basically, as we've talked about in the earlier slides, how much of the effect of financial education is due to changes in financial numeracy, financial awareness, versus financial attitudes. And so to try to tease out these different mechanisms, what we've done is to conduct a randomized field experiment among the urban poor in India. So in particular, we worked in the state of Gujarat, in the city of Ahmedabad. So we were working in the urban slums there. And so randomized field experiments, in case you're not familiar, is basically similar to medical trials, which we've heard about a lot during the pandemic. So for example, if people wanted to know, if they wanted to test if a COVID-19 vaccine was effective, they would take a set of study participants. Some of them would be randomly assigned to get a COVID vaccine, and then the others would get a placebo vaccine. So that allows us to test if the COVID-19 vaccine was effective. And so that's the same idea that we're taking here, except that we're not working with vaccines, but rather we're working with financial education treatments. And so in order to assess the impact of these different financial education interventions, we measure financial knowledge and outcomes 10 months after these interventions were given. So what we're first going to do is to estimate the impact of these interventions on behavior. And so for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to focus on two outcomes. One is budgeting, whether the person writes a budget, which we are conceptualizing as kind of a simple financial behavior that people can adopt. And then the second one is savings or opening a bank savings account, which we're conceptualizing as kind of a more complex financial behavior that the respondents would adopt. And then we're going to apply causal mediation analysis, which is a method that is actually more popular in political science and biostatistics, but we're applying it here in an economics framework. And we're going to use this approach to decompose the effects of financial education into two sets. One is what we're basically going to call indirect effects following the literature. So these are the effects of financial education that are through the particular mechanism, like numeracy, awareness, and attitudes. And then the other are basically those direct effects, which are due to all other channels. So we did an experiment in India among the urban poor, and our experiment consisted of 3 different financial education interventions. The first one is a video-based financial education program, where basically people who were randomly assigned to receive this intervention had 5 sessions over 5 weeks, where each session was around 2 to 3 hours. And over those 5 sessions, they covered many different financial education topics, including budgeting, savings, loans, insurance, and financial management. And so these interventions were carried out in a classroom setting with 20 participants, and all of the participants in the classroom were assigned to the same treatment, either financial education or the placebo treatment. And so after they've watched the videos, there would be a group discussion led by a moderator to talk about the main topics from the video that they watched. In addition to financial education videos, a subset of those assigned to the financial education videos and not the placebo, half of those assigned to financial education were randomly assigned to receive a financial goal setting intervention, which basically means that a enumerator visited the respondent in their household and encouraged them to set a short-term goal, such as opening a bank account. And then the enumerator also gave them a calendar to set those target dates and put them in their home. So these were not compulsory. So there were no implications if they did not achieve the goal. But basically the idea is to kind of nudge them into thinking about setting a date for a financial goal, such as opening a bank account. And then the last intervention that we implemented was basically a financial counseling intervention, which was one-on-one. So individuals who received this intervention got a visit from a financial counselor once a month for 4 months. And the financial counselor was basically helping them with anything that they wanted on demand. So if they wanted to help with, for example, getting together documents that they needed to open a bank account, then the financial counselor would help them do that. So these are our main results. So I'm now turning to the results. So in this slide, I'm showing the effect of the interventions on behavior. So the y-axis is basically the proportion of the individuals, and the different colors of the bar refer to the different treatment groups. And so what we see here, for example, is that the control group, 18% of the control group, so the group that didn't receive any interventions, reported that they were writing a budget, and around 25% of the control group were reporting that they had a formal bank savings account. And so what we can see from this figure is that the red bar, which is financial education alone, the treatment of only financial education, didn't really bring large changes in financial behavior. The larger changes that we see are when financial education is combined, for example, with counseling, which is the orange bar, or when we combine all 3 interventions, which are financial education, goal setting, and counseling, which is kind of this teal bar on the last bar on the right. Then we also looked at the impact of the interventions on these 3 dimensions of financial knowledge that we mentioned. So, for example, we can see here that, so the y-axis is the proportion of correct answers to our kind of knowledge test. So what we see here is that in the control group, around 70% had correct answers to the numeracy questions, and around 68% had correct answer to the awareness questions. And so what we can see here is that the impact of all of the interventions basically are zero in terms of numeracy. We don't see any changes in numeracy as a result of the interventions. However, we do see higher financial awareness and financial attitudes due to the intervention compared to the control group. So in this slide, then, we're trying to understand how much of the effects of financial education on financial outcomes are actually through these pathways of financial knowledge that we talked about. So here, the y-axis is the percentage of the effect that is explained by the given pathway. And the colors of the bar refer to the different pathways. So blue for numeracy, red for awareness, and green for attitudes. So a higher bar means that that pathway explains more of the effect of financial education. And so what we can see here is that basically numeracy does not explain any of the effect of financial education. For this outcome here, which is about budgeting, so we can see that both awareness and attitudes play a role as mediators. But when we look at savings behavior, then we can see that basically, again, as before, numeracy doesn't play a role in explaining the effect of financial education on savings. Awareness doesn't play that much of a role, but it's actually mainly attitudes that play a role in explaining the effects of financial education on savings behavior. So I'm keeping track of my time, and I know I have like maybe less than a minute left, so let me just conclude. So in this paper, we've used a field experiment in India and mediation analysis to try to understand financial knowledge as the mechanism between financial education to financial outcomes. And so what we're arguing in our paper is that basically for financial education to effectively impact outcomes through financial knowledge, we basically need two links in this causal chain to hold. So the first is that financial education needs to impact financial knowledge. And the question there is basically, how should we measure financial knowledge? And so what we're proposing in our paper is to have a broader measure of financial knowledge that looks at numeracy, awareness, and attitudes. So if financial education does impact financial knowledge, the second step in the causal chain is basically, how does that financial knowledge actually lead to changes in financial behavior? And so as I've mentioned, we find that numeracy doesn't mediate any of the effects. For more simple financial behaviors like budgeting, we see that both awareness and attitudes are equally important. But for more complex outcomes like bank savings, it's only attitudes that play a mediating role. And so if you believe the results of our paper, and if you believe that they can be applied to other settings, then the implication of our paper for program design is that basically if the objective of your financial education program is to get individuals to open a bank account, then changing attitudes is going to be kind of the key mechanism that might unlock that outcome. So let me end there. Thank you so much for your attention. Please feel free to contact me in case you have questions about our research.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fenella. Let me straight away ask you a question that actually one of the panelists put in the chat. She wanted to know what was the placebo program? What did that involve?
So the placebo program, so I didn't have time to go through it, but the placebo program was a health training program. So instead of people were still invited to come and watch videos, but they watched a program that was unrelated to financial education. And in this case, it was health.
Okay, great. Thanks. Are there any other questions that anybody would like to ask, either from the panel or from the attendees?
If I may, I have one question. This is Aiko.
Aiko, yeah.
So, yeah, thank you. So very, very interesting finding as we embark on our financial literacy training. So this awareness, which might also have, and the make decision to actually open the bank account might also have to do with their characteristics of the potential, the people who went through your trial. If has there been any heterogeneity or particular aspect that influenced this decision? That would be my question. Thank you.
So we were not really powered to do heterogeneity analysis, so we didn't do that for this particular study. But I guess what you're asking is whether changes in awareness were kind of, for example, different between men and women. So we don't have evidence for that since we're not powered to do that. But I think kind of the awareness questions that we asked were basically targeted to measure if they had knowledge about the availability of different financial products for them and kind of the details of those products. And so that quite differs from, these things about, can you, these are two financial products, which one is better for you, and calculate, which one gives you a better interest rate. So we're trying to kind of get at a measure of financial knowledge that is kind of at a more basic level, in particular, which is kind of what drove us to this dimensions of financial knowledge, because when during our pilot, when we were working with these populations, many of them basically have low education. So I guess the way that we're seeing is that it's not the role of financial education to teach people how to do these calculations, but rather to build awareness and change their attitudes about kind of the benefits of these different products.
Let me ask a couple of other questions that have come from the audience. There's two that you can answer together. One is just, were the videos pre-recorded or were they live? So I guess was somebody presenting in front of them live? And the second was, did the video session stress the importance of saving? This is with respect to changing attitudes.
Yeah, so the videos that we used were something that we co-developed with a local institution that we were working with. So they were recorded, and then basically all groups watched the same set of videos. So did the video session, so for the question about whether the video sessions stress the importance of saving, so yes, the video sessions did stress the importance of savings. I think each session of the intervention had a particular topic. So one topic was budgeting, and so of course in that video they also stressed the importance of writing a budget. One session was about savings, where they stressed the importance of saving, and then the other was things about borrowing. And so in each of these videos, kind of the quote unquote, I'd say, good financial behaviors are quite stressed. Yes.
And let me ask another question first, and then I'll go back to the one above it. These consultants that you had, the financial counselors, sorry, were they from the community or were they hired surveyors? Were they students?
Yes, so they were from the community. So we worked with a research center in India, and they had helped us identify people that would work as financial counselors. So if I remember correctly, one of the main requirements was that they finished a bachelor degree in a related field, like finance, for example. And then they were hired to provide the service to the population, to the study population for our study.
Okay, great. Thanks. There's one more question. You can choose to either type an answer to it, because I'm aware that we're really running over.
Yes,
but the question
that.
is, you will do that. Okay, great. And then
yes.
we'll all have access to that as well.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's keep going, just in the interest of time. Our next speaker is Juyoung Jang. Juyoung, if you would like to share your screen.
Sure.
Juyoung is a policy researcher and formerly was Director of International Partnerships at the Migration Research and Training Center in Seoul, South Korea. She has a PhD in Family Social Science from the University of Minnesota, and she will also be talking about financial education and financial behaviors. Feel free to start.
Thank you, Sata, for introducing me. So good afternoon. I am Juyoung Jang, policy researcher at the Migration Research and Training Center, South Korea. I am really thrilled to introduce you to the MRTC's project about financial education and financial behavior of overseas Filipino workers in South Korea. I will give you some brief background about the situation. So in 2020, there were about 40,000 Filipino migrants, including 21,000 low-skilled workers. Korea's employment permit system regulating low-skilled workers, it allows the workers to reside in Korea up to 9 years and 8 months with some extension. However, the policy does not encourage low-skilled workers to settle permanently in Korea, so the workers cannot sponsor their family members to live in Korea. And therefore, most low-skilled migrant workers, they send remittances to families in their home countries and engage in transnational financial management. The amount of the remittances sent to the Philippines from Korea was over $788 million in 2021. So financial capability is defined as one's ability to assess and manage finances. In the previous presentation, Fenella really articulated all the concepts about financial knowledge, but in my presentation, the terms will be used more literally, so I hope you wouldn't be confused. Previous literature found that migrant workers, they often have limited access to formal financial services. So different financial systems and cultures across countries, also the language barriers could discourage migrant workers to use financial services in the host country. And migration status, especially undocumented status, could affect the access to formal financial services. And these factors tend to decrease migrant workers' financial self-efficacy and also hinder their optimal financial behavior in the host country. And it is well known that financial education can foster financial capability, and the financial capability is critical for migrant workers to really fully benefit from their migratory experience, like spending several years in the host country. And the Philippine government has actively established various support programs to its overseas workers, also those workers in Korea. So therefore, Filipino migrant workers became the target population of this project. This is the result of a national survey, and the survey asked migrant workers about their plans after working in Korea. So compared to low-skilled migrant workers from all the other countries, Filipino workers, they tended to have higher aspirations of launching a business. They really wanted to have their own businesses after they returned to home. And in our survey, which I will introduce you shortly, even over 80% of our respondents wanted to start a business after returning home. And I will briefly introduce the financial education programs for migrants in Korea and in the Philippines. The Ministry of Justice, which is in charge of regulating migrants in Korea, provides initial orientation course for immigrants to give some introductory information about Korean social systems and cultures. An overview of how to use banking services, that is a part of this 2-hour orientation program. But because it is only a portion of the 2-hour program, it is very abstract and does not really contain any necessary information, I think. The Financial Supervisory Service, that is a quasi-government authority in charge of supervising the entire financial sector in Korea, offers a guide to financial services through a published handbook and video clips translated in 8 languages. But it is not well known by field educators or migrants, so unfortunately, it is not really used by many. The Korean Immigration and Integration Program is a social integration program run by the Ministry of Justice. And the FSS and another agency, the Korean Consumer Agency, they support this program by providing financial and consumer education sessions. But these sessions, they are irregular and not mandatory. So not many migrants actually have attended this type of education programs as part of this integration program. The Philippines, in our study, the sending country, offers more financial programs to overseas workers across all phases of migration, like you know. The financial education is included as a part of pre-departure, post-arrival, and reintegration programs. Still, there are some concerns that the portion of financial education needs to be improved in these programs. Also, non-governmental organizations like Attica Overseas Workers and Community Initiatives and financial service providers also provide various programs. And I believe that it will be better to be explained thoroughly in tomorrow's presentation by Attica's executive director. And I will explain more from the receiving countries side. So this project was started based on the conversation and the agreement of the need for better financial education programs for migrant workers between the Philippine Overseas Labor Office and MRTC researchers. We had a common concern that a level of financial preparedness, like that I don't have any money to return or I haven't accumulated enough assets, could be the main cause of overstaying and becoming irregular migrant workers in Korea. The project aimed to understand the overseas Filipino workers' financial attitudes and behaviors to identify more relevant topics for future financial education programs, so help them to be prepared for the return, because it is unavoidable to leave the Korea after their time is over. And to achieve this aim, we explored existing financial education programs and conducted surveys and focus group interviews and held an expert forum. So results of the survey are the main part of this presentation. The survey data were collected at 2 financial workshops, and those workshops were organized by Polo Korea, and it was convenient sampling. The questionnaire was developed by MRTC side in English, and the staff at Polo, they confirmed whether the questionnaire was appropriate and understandable by Filipino low-skilled workers. While we conducted the self-administered survey, because it was written in English, Polo staff helped respondents by explaining the question into Tagalog if it was necessary. And the survey included questions about financial behaviors, knowledge, and financial attitudes and self-efficacy, and the needs of financial education by topics. And it also included demographic characteristics of respondents, the amount and the frequency of remittances, and plans after the return. So respondents were 116 low-skilled workers, and the majority were males. In Korea, most Filipino low-skilled workers are male. And the demographic characteristics are shown in this table, and I will not read them all. I will just give you 20 seconds to read them. Okay, 20 seconds seems too long. I will just skip to the next table. So the financial behaviors in this study, it was measured by asking how often they engaged in 10 financial activities. But as you can see from the table, one item was not included. That item was about credit card activity, but more than 40% of the respondents said that credit card activity was not applicable to them. So we did not include that item into our study. And the financial activity respondents engaged in most frequently was paying bills on time, and the least frequently was contributing to investment or retirement. Financial literacy was measured using questions from the 2014 World Bank survey, because we thought we could compare the results from the Filipinos in the Philippines. Of the 7 items measuring financial literacy, simple distribution calculation was the most respondents answered correctly, but more complex financial concepts like inflation or compound interest were not really well understood by our respondents. And the level of financial literacy of our respondents was somewhat higher than the results of the World Bank survey 2014. And now you are seeing about some psychological aspects like financial attitudes and financial self-efficacy. The mean scores of the two upper statements that suggest that positive financial attitudes was common among our respondents. And respondents were more confident in making financial decisions in Korea, not in the Philippines. And we tried to understand why they answered like this and concluded that it could be the reflection that they were engaged in only simpler financial activities and decision makings in Korea, not actually having more knowledge or more capable of making complex decisions in Korea compared to their home country. And more respondents, they reported receiving financial education in Korea than in the Philippines, so more post-arrival than pre-departure. Both in the Philippines and Korea, the education provider respondents took the most was from the Philippine government office, followed by NGOs and Filipino banks. But in the focus group interview, we asked about their experiences with the bank, and then they said that the education from bank was more about advertising their products, not to really delivering some comprehensive financial knowledge to them. And many of them said that it was really not necessary or helpful. And very few respondents attended financial education by Korean institutes. Using the responses, we conducted a hierarchical regression analysis to examine factors associated with Filipino workers' financial behaviors. So as you can see, unmarried respondents were less likely to display the sound financial behavior than their married counterparts. And other demographic characteristics like gender or education or years in Korea were not significant. And financial literacy, it was not significantly associated with the respondents' financial behaviors in our study. But psychological aspects like financial self-efficacy in the Philippines and financial attitudes, they were significantly related to positive financial behaviors. And very unfortunately, the experience of attending financial education, either in Korea or Philippines, was not a significant factor explaining financial behaviors, and we were really disappointed by the results. So how to interpret this result? I mean, the overall result suggests that the sample of Filipino workers, they were not really enough equipped with complex financial management skills. So their financial literacy and financial behaviors were not sufficient to prepare for their financial future because they need to leave Korea sometime. Migrant workers in Korea, we think they may experience some difficulties in accessing Korean financial services for their financial management. And in that case, probably just sending remittances to their families in the home country could be the most accessible way to manage their income rather than managing that in Korea. But this kind of inadequate financial management, because they are not really handling their money by themselves, it could make it very hard for them to achieve their long-term financial goals like launching a business. And the insignificant association between financial education and financial behavior could be influenced by the quality of the financial education programs. So if the content of these programs, if it was not to equip migrant workers with necessary financial skills and promote their sound attitudes, its effects cannot be guaranteed. And it is not just unique to our study. Previous studies, they also mentioned that those with low income might not show improvement in financial behavior if they just attend financial education. And it could also be applicable to our findings. And of course, there are several limitations of this study. First, we had convenient sample. And due to the small sample size, we had variables like remittances, interest in certain financial topics, and future plans, but these variables were not included in our analysis. And future studies need to examine their influences on financial behavior. And financial education programs that can be used in financial management in both the Philippines and Korea need to be developed because they need to handle transnational financial management. And the program should be provided on regular and continuing basis to shape their healthy financial attitudes and strengthen it over and over. And the focus group interviews as some sort of supplementary resources here. It supported the survey results. So we interviewed 10 Filipino workers who resided in Korea for 2 to 11 years, but all of them were passive users of Korean banking systems. They actually had Korean bank accounts because their employers asked them to open one for direct deposit. And like most survey respondents, they also wanted to launch a business or make an investment, but with a small capital. Because they did not have clear ideas of the requirements of starting a business or making an investment, they did not really connect their financial management behavior to their future goals. And many of them wanted to make investments in Korea, but did not know financial education programs about that offered by Korean government agencies. And I would like to close this presentation with introducing a new intervention project based on the product research, this product research. The Polo Korea staff and MRPC researchers, after we analyzed all these results, we concluded that there was a need to develop financial education programs to set clear financial goals and plans, especially since the most Filipino workers in our study, they desire to launch their businesses, but they did not prepare to achieve the goal seriously. They just were thinking about that, but not really doing something about it. So Pinoy, which is promoting entrepreneurship and agricultural business to Filipinos in Korea, that is a flagship project on the reintegration of overseas Filipinos that the Embassy of the Philippines in Korea launched last year. The embassy, as I know, had previously provided several seminars regarding entrepreneurship, but this project is really unique because it attempts to provide more organized seminars based on OFW's needs. And thankfully, because there is not only the Polo OWA Korea, but the Philippine Agriculture Office and the Philippine Trade and Investment Center are in Korea, so they could have some collaborative seminar series together. And up to this far, there were 10 seminars delivered online or face-to-face. Then the topics presented so far was business plan writing, personal development, and business opportunities, and especially introducing opportunities by regions of workers' hometowns. So they could be really selective about, oh, I am very interested in this topic because it's about my hometown. And this project became very popular among workers in Korea, and I really look forward to explore the project's influence on the financial behavior changes or attitudes in the near future. Right. Now I will happy to get some questions or your comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So one quick question is, was the orientation compulsory for all arriving workers in South Korea?
For workers, yes, it is mandatory to all workers in Korea.
Great. And then we have another question. Did the survey measure the impact on remitting behaviors? Did it help them choose money transfer operators with better terms or consider things like foreign exchange rates, interest rates, etc.?
Oh, so we had the measures about the remitting behaviors, like the frequency or the amount of remittances. But well, yes, that could be our next study because we did not really test the association between those two, and that would be really interesting. But we had only about 100 samples, so could not really test all kinds of possible relationships. I will keep that in mind. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And I think Fenella has a question for you, which is, do you know if they were engaging in informal saving, these migrants?
They were engaged in what saving?
Informal.
Informal savings.
Informal.
Yes, some of them actually had. One of our focus group interviewee, he was saving regularly quite a big amount of his income, but he did not trust any financial services. So he saved the money at home, and it was really risky. And I don't think it is uncommon among those Filipino workers in Korea.
Great, thank you. Oh, one last question. Is there a salary cap for foreign domestic workers in Korea? Does it affect their ability to set up businesses?
Not really the salary cap, but there is some regulation about the working hours based on the labor protecting law in Korea. So the employer can't overwork them in Korea, and that could actually affect their salary.
Okay, I'm going to take one last question. There are a lot of questions. I just want to tell everybody that we will have an open session right at the end. So please stay if you have questions you'd like to ask to any of our presenters, or just if you'd like to be part of the general discussion. We will open up the floor and allow everybody who's interested to come in and be able to unmute themselves and speak if necessary. One last question I'll ask is it easy for them to open a bank account? Does the bank need passports? But could it be that the employer keeps their passport so they don't have the passport?
So if they are documented workers in Korea, yes, it is quite easy to open a bank account, and even bankers visit the their workspace to open the bank account, because many employers, they use direct deposit. So most of the interviewees I met, they had Korean bank.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's keep going. So our next presenter is Nobuyuki Nakamura. Nobu, do you want to share your screen? He is a research fellow at the Ogata Research Institute for Peace and Development in Japan, and has a PhD in international studies from the University of Tokyo. And this paper is co-authored with his advisor, Professor Aya Suzuki.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Sujata, and good afternoon, everyone. I deeply appreciate for having these opportunities. As Sujata introduced, I'm Nobuyuki Nakamura from JICA Ogata Research Institute. This research is jointly worked with Professor Aya Suzuki from the University of Tokyo. In this research, we study the impact of financial support in host and home countries during the COVID-19 pandemic and individual altruism or international remittance. So let me introduce the background. We observe the vast flow of international remittances, and its economic effect are enormous. The current amount of remittance is 4 times larger than the official development assistance, and it's recognized as an engine for economic growth in developing countries. Researchers have investigated the motivation behind migrant workers' remittance to their home countries. Also, the researchers explore one noteworthy phenomenon in the remittance behavior called the crowding out effect. That is, if the home household increases their pre-transfer income, the migrant will reduce the remittance to their homes. Many studies have investigated whether these crowding out effects occur with public transfers. However, the discussion is not conclusive because it depends on the policy context. Moreover, many studies suffer from some problems in the estimation to capture the effect of their interest variables because of the endogeneity or data unavailability. These give rise to the need for further investigation into the mechanism of the international remittance. The onset of the COVID-19 pandemic has presented the opportunity to examine the remittance motifs in greater detail. At the beginning of the pandemic, some international organizations implied the worst scenario on the international remittance. In other words, international remittance would decrease by approximately more than 20% due to the adverse effect. However, 1 year later, the World Bank published the actual result of the international remittance. They estimate the total remittance amount in 2020 as only 1.6%. below those in 2019 in the world. Surprisingly, the remittance amount in 2020 was larger than the FDI into developing countries in the same year. The World Bank's team suggests the potential reasons for international remittance to be resilient to the COVID-19 shock. As a first cause, migrants have desires to help their families in the severe shock. In other words, individual altruism has driven the remittance. Another important driver is that physical stimuli, such as cash transferred by the host countries, have maintained their economies and benefited even migrants. While these explanations seem reasonable, these are conjectures rather than results based on the rigorous research. Also, most countries have implemented social security policies after the outbreak of the COVID-19. We need to study whether the effect of financial support on remittance behaviors. Thus, we explore the impact of emergency subsidies in host and home countries and the direct measure of the individual altruism degree on international remittance by using unique data from the foreign care workers in Japan. Then let me explain our research samples of foreign care workers in Japan, FCWs. Japan has been facing the challenge of the rapidly aging society in recent decades, and its pace is the fastest globally. The expansion of demand for elderly care services causes a chronic labor shortage in this industry. To alleviate the shortage of workers, the government has opened the door for recruiting the FCWs and allowed the working visas since the latter half of the 2000s. One of the interesting features of these samples is that we can evaluate the differences in visa types within the same industry, which is rarely seen in other industries in Japan. I show the classification of each visa. While each visa has a specific trait, 4 visas can be classified into 2 types: permanent and professional visas and low-skilled and temporary visas. Some studies suggest that the possible duration of stay in the host countries may affect the economic outcomes differently. This classification in the visa schemes within the care industry allows us to differentiate the effect of the temporariness of stay in the host country on remittance behaviors. After the COVID-19 shock, in Japan, the government implemented the one-time unconditional cash payment program in 2020. One of the attractive traits of this cash transfer was that the government distributed cash to all residents regardless of gender, age, household income, and nationalities. Thus, the FCWs are a target of 100,000 Japanese yen value subsidized. As one of the interesting points, the payment timing randomly depended on each municipality because of the delay in logistics. The payment timing was almost random among the cities regardless of their economic status or location. For instance, Osaka is one of the cities which delayed the distribution of the cash. As the graph is shown, we can observe the variation of the timing in the samples. We exploited such an exogenous variation in the cash payment as a quasi-natural experiment to test the remittance mechanism. Also, most developing countries and the home countries of the FCWs have introduced some social protection measures to save students' lives globally. In contrast to the case in Japan, social assistance in developing countries was provided exclusively for nationals in trouble in the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, the Philippine government subsidized to the beneficiary of the conditional cash transfer program. We obtained the detailed information about their family left behind in their home countries in our survey, including the timing of receiving any emergency subsidies from their home government. We implemented this original survey using an online platform to minimize measurement errors and logistic costs and to easily access the survey even in the pandemic. We recruited the sample via postal mail to the more than 4,000 elderly care facilities. Respondents access a questionnaire with their smartphone or computers because most workers are younger and they have digital devices. We conducted a survey using a beginner-level Japanese questionnaire because all FCWs are required to master the minimum language level. One of the caveats in the online survey is that the respondents do not answer as diligently as the researchers expected, and these samples decrease the validity of the survey. Thus, we adopt a methodological tool called the instruction manipulation check in the questionnaire, and we obtained 200 samples in total. We asked detailed information in the questionnaire about the respondent and their families. About the remittance experience, we asked each quarterly total remittance amount from 2019 to 2021 in details. One of the interesting features of this survey is that we include games and questions to check the degree of individual autism. The first was a self-reporting scale based on the past engagement in autistic behavior. This scale is popularly used in the field of psychology. The respondent rated the frequency with which they engaged in 20 specific behaviors. One of the caveats of this original scale is that some specific behavior in the scales are context-specific, which is strongly influenced by the Western culture. We selected 10 common behaviors across the countries. Moreover, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to behavioral change among people, so we made a question on their autistic experience before they came to Japan or before the pandemic began. The other index is from the dictator's game to detect individual autism. In a typical setting, two participants directly joined the game, and the researchers evaluated how much money they gave to the opponent each other. However, we could not create such an environment in online survey. Moreover, some studies suggest that the result of the dictator's game may be influenced by the closeness to the opponent, such as family members or anonymous person, regarding the information asymmetry about the receipt of money. To address these concerns, we provide the dictator's game with two opponents in two situations, that is, 4 games in total in this survey. In the first case, we showed a fictitious woman as the opponent. We provided her profile with her photo. We assumed that we produce a setting similar to the ordinary dictator's game in person. In addition, 2 situations are provided in this fictitious case. One is that women know that the respondent receives money, and the other is that women does not know that the respondent receives money. So this procedure can cope with the issue regarding the information asymmetry. In the second case, we conducted the game in a situation where the opponent was the respondent family in their home countries. Similar to the first case, we offered 2 situations regarding the information asymmetry, so the family knows or the family doesn't know. We asked how much the respondent would pay for the other person if we gave the 10,000 Japanese yen for each respondent and in all games. We constructed the panel data based on the quota unit of each respondent, corresponding with the remittance amount we asked. So we have more than 1,500 observations. As for the strategy, we employed the fixed and random effect regression with sample level cluster standard error. In the estimation, the outcome variable is the log of the quota remittance amount. We converted this amount into the PPP value US dollars. We did the same process for other income-related variables. And about the COVID-19 variables and subsidy timing and any negative shock in the home household, we create a dummy variables which equals 1 when each event occurred. So let me show the result. I did not observe any significant result of the COVID-19 outbreak on the remittance. On the other hand, when migrants receive special cash payment by the Japanese government, they increase their remittance by about 79%. Moreover, the results show that the remittance increase as the income of the respondent. Here. Random estimation shows that the home household income negatively significantly affect the remittance amount. Moreover, the results suggest that the remittance amount didn't change after the home household faced with negative shocks such as infection or unemployment, or they received the home subsidies. As for the time invariant trade, temporary visa holders have increased their remittance amount. Regarding the autism scale, we did not observe the effect of the behavior itself. However, our heterogeneous analysis yields some interesting result. As for the COVID-19 shock, we detected some positive effect with temporary status and psychological autism scale at 10% significant level. Regarding the interaction effect with the emergency subsidies in the host countries, we did not find any significant crowding out effect. On the other hand, temporary visa holders or higher Arctic respondents increased their remittance amount at the time of receiving subsidy by the host countries. Compared with the primary analysis, while the autism scales are insignificant in the primary analysis, but the policy implementation to transfer can strongly affect the remittance among the higher autistic migrant. Also, temporary visa holders remit more in the pandemic and by the policy interventions. Autistic behavior may be driven by either pure autism or warm girl or vanity motives. This table presents the result of the heterogeneous analysis of each dictator's game. We observe that all the coefficients are insignificant except for the interaction effect between the COVID-19 phases and the unknown situation for anonymous FCWs, which is positive at a 10% significant level. For this particular scenario, the FCW would not ask for something in return or to show vanity to the opponents because the opponent doesn't know the respondent at all. Given this result, we may associate the behavior of the FCWs in increasing the amount of remittance with pure autism, not with warm glow or vanity during the pandemic. From the results, the cash transfer from the host government prompted the international remittance by the migrant. Also, our analysis suggests that motives based on the autism are monitored during the pandemic. Thus, we support the assumption of the mechanism to be resilient suggested by the international organizations. On the contrary, we do not observe any crowding out effect in the global health risks. Moreover, temporary migrants emit more than permanent residents even in the COVID shock. So we have some limitations to the research because the sample are relatively small from the one industry in one country. However, the findings contribute a better understanding of the mechanism of the motives for international remittances. These findings can be used to improve migration research and policy design on social security and migration research in both developing and developed countries. So that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nobuyuki, and also for finishing exactly within 15 minutes. Are there any questions for him? Any questions from the floor? Yes, Albert has a question.
Yeah, I was curious, if you look at individuals and how they respond to the games, in terms of how much they give, does that correspond to how much they actually give when they get a subsidy? I mean, this relationship between the game behavior and the real life behavior. Thanks.
So you mean about our games of the individualities? So
do people who give more in the games, do they also send more remittances in response to the subsidy they receive?
Yes. So in the heterogeneous analysis, we can see the about the psychological autism. We can see the after receiving the host subsidies, higher autistic people, their limit more. Maybe this is.
Oh, I get it. But this is not for the games. People who give more than that would be the ninth column, right? Or the
Yeah.
And there's no effect. There's no relationship to how they give in the games. And
yes.
whether they're more responsive to the subsidy.
Hmm.
Okay, thanks.
And Fenella has a question as well. Fenella, do you want to just ask it?
Yeah, sure. Because from what I understood in your analysis, you were using kind of the natural experiment from the 100,000 yen that was given as a one-time cash payment. But
Yes.
I guess I was just curious about, can you say how much, based on kind of your regression estimates, can you say how much of that 100,000 yen actually turned out to add to the remittances? So was it like they sent 50% of that 100,000 yen as remittances, or?
Yeah, and in this this is a 100,000 yen Japanese yens, and then normally in each quarter the migrant limits about 100,000 yen in each quarter. So they increase their remittance by about 79% in the
I see.
quarter. The subsidized was received to the migrant. Yeah.
That's quite large.
Yeah.
So could it be, this also, I think, connects to something I was wondering about, because your results are interesting that even when the family receives a shock, they don't increase their remittances, right?
Yeah.
Could it just be that they're maxed out on how much they can remit, and so there is just no leeway over there to increase remittances?
In this, we don't have any data about their families, how they use their remittance. But
No, it's not about how they use, but the people who are sending, the migrants.
Mhm.
If you can't take a loan in order to send a remittance and increase remittance, then you're sending as much as you possibly can, then you can't really respond to a shock by increasing your remittances.
So you mean, sorry, I
Okay, doesn't matter. We can
sorry,
discuss
sorry.
it later.
Okay, okay.
We have one more question, which is from one of the attendees. Do participants that choose to give money to a similar person, what reasons did they share to give money to that person instead of their family? Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, in this, I'm not sure the mechanism of the why people do not send to the family more insignificantly, but maybe I'm sure, but sorry, I cannot answer at the moment, but yes, so maybe purity. So in this game, maybe we can evaluate pure altruism. So from this answer, from this result, so yes, so how do I say?
It's okay, we can keep going. Maybe you can
Yeah,
come
yeah.
back to it later. It's
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the
yeah.
Zoom thing. Are the results affected by where the migrants are from?
Yeah, in this, most of the FCWs in Japan are from the Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. So most of the Southeast Asian countries.
So do the results vary by which country they're from? It's a heterogeneity question.
Sorry, I didn't conduct a heterogeneous analysis yet. I will do.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nobuyuki,
Thank you
very
so
much. Let's move on to Jonathan Kapal. You can stop sharing, Nobuyuki. Yes, thank you. So Jonathan, if you would like to share your screen. Great. So Jonathan is the Chief of Global Programs at Sabre Asia. He has many years of experience leading projects and consulting on areas related to migration, remittances, and financial literacy, and has launched multiple digital platforms targeted at migrants and their remittances. So he will be, I think, telling us more about the platform that Sabre Asia has recently launched. Over to you.
Oh, sorry, just checking this is actually sharing. Hold on.
Yeah, we did see it.
It's disappeared again now.
It says you have started sharing. Now it's gone away.
Apologies, just bear with me one moment. Okay, this should now work. Apologies about this. It's not.
It says you have started screen sharing, but we just don't see it yet.
Okay, I'm just gonna have to. I think I'm just gonna just revert to my Mac here.
Yeah, we see it now.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be presenting Savor Asia to you today. And with Savor Asia, Savor Asia is a migrant information and currently remittance comparison platform. And what we're seeking to do is to build a financial education platform that is going to provide and going to help towards the empowerment of migrant communities across Asia. So just to give a bit of context here, so my company Savor Global is a migration and remittances consultancy and software and project developer. For several years, since 2018, we've worked with the International Labour Organization, who in turn are supported by Australian Aid and Canada, specifically through the ILO Triangle and ASEAN program. And this program is, sorry, hold on a second. Yes, this program is focused on supporting migrant workers across the ASEAN region. So this is now for the last 4 years, we've worked with them both in terms of their support in developing the platform, initially a website, now and also an app, multilingual. And in more recent times, and particularly over the last year, thankfully, post COVID restrictions, we've been able to start doing a lot more activity on the ground. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So Savor Asia, as I mentioned before, works with Triangle and ASEAN across several Southeast Asian remittance corridors. This includes Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand as 7 countries. It includes overall across Savor Asia about 42 remittance corridors. So that's 9 countries across Southeast Asia that we're including information for in Southeast Asia, and then an additional 18 Southeast Asia specific corridors from the 3 key send countries that we focus on. So again, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. It's a constantly evolving platform, and currently it has 4 key features. So we have the remittance comparison function. I'm going to show a bit of a video walkthrough in a moment, which will actually show the platform and all of the features. But just for context, overall, that's including 121 MTOs, so money transfer operators and banks, across 71 corridors, including 14 receive countries. We include financial tools, so we have a budget calculator and we have an overtime calculator, which is specific for migrant workers living and working in Malaysia. And we also have a lot of resources and local support information. So basically, we look to connect as much as possible with financial services, with practitioners, and lots of the organizations initiatives that we've been hearing about today, and we will continue to hear about exactly the sort of initiatives we would like to feature and be able to direct people to. We have a finance basics section as well, which is sort of a simple way of explaining basic financial concepts that is available multilingually. So I'm just going to play a video which walks through
The following is an overview of the Savor Asia app. First, select the language you'd like to use. The first tab helps you compare rates to send home. Select Send Country and select your received country and enter the amount. Results will show from highest received money to the least. You can see more details about the speed, fees, send and receive method, and foreign exchange rate. Click Send Money to go straight to the website. On the next tab, you can use the budget calculator to make sure you're not overspending. Enter your income, expenses, and you will see the summary of the amount of money you earn. If you are in Malaysia, you can use our overtime calculator to see how much you should earn. You can also check out the video guides on how to use the Saver Asia app, as well as access to finance basics where you can find answers to common questions such as how to open a bank account. Click Read More to read the answers. Lastly, you can find out why it's important to compare rates before sending money overseas. And lastly, you can change the language and currency in our app.
Okay. Looking at the current remittance market, which is obviously critical to migrant workers. Today, there are many, many different send and receive methods available to migrant workers. This can vary quite considerably between the different countries that people will be based in, and the different levels of sort of financial progress that might be available in that country. And these different services carry with them a very broad range of pricing. So we often find that in the markets that we can compare, there may be costs that could be perhaps as low as 1% or even lower, right up to costs that are upwards of 10%. So obviously this makes a very big difference to the receiver. However, in most markets today, there are low-cost options available. It's just a case of actually ensuring that migrants are aware of these, and also the receivers can access the low-cost options. In terms of the challenge, this is kind of overarching rationale for Saver Asia is the need to educate migrants about their options. We often find that people around the world, not least across Asia, have a lot of loyalty to particular products. Change can sometimes be slow, and then when a migrant actually changes the provider they're using, they may remain with that provider for some time because they've been happy to change, not realizing that perhaps there is better options out there. Low-cost services, we're finding that where visas where migrant workers are documented and have the ability to send formally, it is helping to generate that shift from informal to formal services. And regional differences can be very significant. Often within the sort of services that might be available within a particular receiver country, for example, can have a big impact on the types of services and the costs that are available. So what we're seeking to do here is we're looking to try and simplify remittances and financial inclusion as much as possible for migrants. So currently on Saver Asia, we have a multilingual platform. We include Burmese, English, Khmer, and Bahasa Indonesia. This is going to be extended in due course to include other languages focused on both Southeast and South Asia. The way that we have produced this, and this is in consultation with focus groups and so on, and across Southeast Asia, is actually making sure that it is simple and understandable and accessible. Currently, we are building on from what we currently have on Saver Asia, and we have we're building on with the Saver Learning education system, which I'll show in a little bit more detail in a minute. Basically, what this is going to be doing is kind of going on from what we have now, ensuring that, again, with a multilingual, clear, and simple messaging, where we can help migrants and their families make informed financial decisions, actually learn how they can access more effective financial products, and also how they can avoid financial abuse. So I'm just going to okay. Yeah, so this is just a walkthrough for Saver Learning. So essentially, this has been developed as a financial literacy app that has been created for migrants and individuals that can benefit from using these services right across the world. From a Saver Asia perspective, we'll be including this and integrating this with the countries that we're focusing on. What we are doing, we're basically ensuring that this is always going to be free at the point of use for migrants and their families. We'll be including kind of gamification aspects to this to encourage engagement and essentially make it fun to learn. We're going to be working with course creators who can help to support and also help to incentivize. So this could be both with regard to financial literacy organizations, also with financial service providers. So for example, banks that may have suitable savings products for migrants in certain countries. Once the migrant has come through and has learned how to understand certain bank accounts and how to save and so on, then they can go through and be connected with partner organizations that they can go and then set up an account and so on. Perhaps they may get a startup amount there to start with. We'll be using geodata and weighted heuristics to offer a unique style of learning. So for example, a certain country could be low in investment literacy as opposed to savings literacy. So we would then create a suggested course and course content, and then would help to build the individuals within the community up with their investment literacy over their savings literacy, given that they'll already be competent within savings to start with. We're also planning, as I mentioned before, to gamify the learning process to help incentivize and motivate individuals in financial literacy itself. Just to stress as well, the intention is we want to be covering the full spectrum. So going through from the most basic foundational budgeting principles right through to investment strategies and, so it can benefit, for example, workers who may become permanent migrants in the countries they live in, support entrepreneurship courses and so on. The approach that we have is to focus on a modular learning process. So this will help us to tailor make courses kind of on the fly effectively, and can be informed by the user responses. And also we will be able to offer the ability for courses to be shown privately or publicly, depending on whom the course creator is. So whilst we'll have a public facing sort of free to use service that will be embedded within Saver Asia, if there are additional features or perhaps a kind of offline version that could be of use to support existing face-to-face learning, that can certainly be arranged. And we're also going to be utilizing active recall and spaced repetition. The screen just went through that. So obviously this is being a proven manner of practice that helps to, based on a trust-based system that can help to ensure that those financial learnings remain with the migrant beyond the course. And we've got the tools on the top here. So we already have some tools that are in place across Saver Asia, but we'll be including these and building more, and these will be interspersed throughout the platform, and will help individuals to learn and to set and to maintain their financial goals. An important thing to raise, and I've noticed this has come up a few times in some of the earlier presentations, given the sort of different varying levels of technological access that people have, the apps, the current apps and the new app will be available going back several generations on both iOS and Android. And we'll also be including lots of audio visual content. So for people who may not have particularly strong literacy skills, they'll be able to have a kind of audio book version, essentially, kind of walking and talking through the course, and also sort of video support and animation and so on with relevant content and context right across the app. Okay. Sorry, 1 second. So just to reiterate, Saver Learning, it's been developed as a free financial education tool, and it aspires to assist in helping migrants and those in need by being free and accessible on mobile devices, whether they're tethered to the internet or not. It will be also available on any device. So much like you would be using a social media service, for example, once you're registered, you'll be able to log in and continue your progress on any device. Alongside this, we also have our own data reporting tool that we're building, which is ensuring that we can create data visualization platform, which from a sort of development practitioner basis, and also from other stakeholders. So for example, anything from central banks through to the remittance industry, can actually basically gain from all sorts of different insights. So whether we're looking at remittance costs and trends, or we're looking at the behavioral insights that we'll be able to gain from the progress that people are making as they go through using Saver Learning, all of this will be available through the reporting tool. In terms of some of the activities that we've been able to do on the ground, as mentioned before, finally we've been able to do activities in Cambodia and Malaysia, and also there's some training now taking place in Myanmar as well. So far since COVID, we've trained over 1,500 people, and this is ongoing and increasing all the time. And through ILO, we've been working with them and partnerships such as Cambodia's National Employment Agency, which has enabled us to be able to deliver training to Cambodian migrant workers prior to departure. In terms of the opportunity, our focus is very much on the digital platform. We ourselves are not going to be in every country delivering face-to-face activities, so we really want to sort of collaborate with as many organizations as possible. So we're doing this, of course, right now with ILO and their partners. We're very open to working with other partners anywhere across Asia where we can add value, and then likewise we can also offer a digital presence for many organizations that may not have so much of a strong presence, and help to sort of spread the word about the services that are available. So in short, we're looking to incorporate as much financial education into pre-departure training as possible, but also hooking that in, so they're making sure people understand there's a digital tool that's there to sort of nurture and continue to aid their growth. Encouraging market transparency and supporting the transition from informal to formal wherever we can. So making people aware that perhaps there's low-cost services that they weren't aware of before, and digital services that are available to them that can help them and their families. And of course, all of this helps to empower these migrant communities and their families, and enable them to support the future financial growth and multi-generational financial growth that can come from that. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, John. That was really informative. Picking up on the question, on the point you raised here about market transparency, there's a couple of questions. One is asking, given that many moneylenders and other MTOs in the Asia region have illegal and unethical operations, what kind of vetting does Saver Asia do?
Okay, so in terms of the vetting, basically, in terms of the financial services we have on the platform at the moment, they are, for now, it's mostly remittance services. So in the markets that the countries that we feature, we make sure that these services are approved or regulated, depending upon who the regulator may be. So, for example, in Australia, there's AUSTRAC, which regulates services. So if a company comes to us and says, we want to be listed, if they're not actually on, if we can't find any evidence of their credentials and they're not actually formally registered, then they can't be on. And going as we expand and include basically partnership opportunities and sort of referrals for people towards other financial service providers such as banks and insurance companies, the same principle will apply. We will be, I guess, somewhat picky in terms of the organizations that we'll be including. So we don't intend on, for example, we won't be connecting people to any sort of loan sharks or kind of anything dubious that is trying to encourage the taking of loans. And this may also extend to other practices such as buy now, pay later. At the very least, we'll be making people very aware of the risks that are involved in these areas.
And another question is about the remittances. So these are digital remittances, so they go through the app and then they would connect to a remittance provider. But there's a question here from Nurina. She's asking, what if people have problems with online platforms and prefer going to physical counters to remit their money?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on Saver Asia, we do include basically as much of the market as we can. So certain countries have more services. So for example, if you're looking at, say, Singapore to the Philippines, which is a very established competitive corridor, we include a vast range of services and include information for those sort of cash to cash services or even cash to home delivery, depending on the country. Right, so basically we will include information right through to the the services that are going to mobile wallets and so on.
Okay.
And at the same time, we are clear about the pricing that is involved there. So making it, and obviously more often than not, the more digital services tend to be cheaper. So we're making that clear. But obviously, we also we actually have a filtering mechanism within Saver Asia to make it clear to people that if actually it might not always be about what the cheapest is. It's actually what is going to be the best way that you can actually get money home. So if they do need to receive money in cash, or perhaps they have a bank account and that works, then they can filter and select and kind of find the appropriate service that way.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I'm actually going to suggest there are other questions as well. I'm going to suggest that people just stay on a little while, and then when we go into the open discussion, perhaps we can ask more questions about Saver Learning and also about the uptake and so on. Thank you very much, John, and we'll move on to Camille.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. So if you can just share your screen, and then I'll just quickly introduce you.
Let me know. Because I had a technical issue this morning, so I'm just gonna give it a try. And if it doesn't work, then maybe you can share it for me.
Sure. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Can you see it like full page?
I don't know, would you call this full page? Yes, now it looks like full page. So yes, it seems to be working. So Camille Bessu is the head of programs and learning designer, as well as acting co-CEO of Uplifters, which is a Hong Kong-based nonprofit organization in financial education. She herself is a human rights advocate, and she is also an International Coaching Federation coach. And I think both of these skills or different experiences, I think, inform what she does at Uplifters. So over to you, Camille.
Thanks a lot, Sujata, and thanks also for the opportunity and like all the very interesting presentations that we've heard so far. I hope I can feed the discussion with mine. So to very briefly give a little bit of context, because I'm sure we have more or less the same level of understanding of what the situation is. So in Hong Kong alone, migrant domestic workers account for 10% of the working population. So Uplifters mainly work with migrant domestic workers coming from the Philippines and from Indonesia, and working in Hong Kong and Singapore, even though we have a few of our students in the Middle East, but I'll come to that later. So what they do in host countries is that they fill a services gap, mainly caring for children and the elderly, so more people can actually work and create value for the society. And just for Hong Kong GDP in 2018, they contributed 3.6%. And again, I mean, we've been discussing a lot about remittances. For example, 10% of the Philippines GDP was attributed to personal remittances in 2018. The challenge we see is that despite this huge contribution to the societies and the economies of their home and host countries, they don't directly benefit from their hard work. I won't be going too much into detail, but the situation, especially in Hong Kong, really worsened with the pandemic. The two key reasons are the imbalance of power they find themselves in, obviously the high financial pressure they face, making them prone to abuse and debt bondage, but also like what we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic is that the limited support network and safety nets that they had kind of rarefied, not to say disappeared for some of them. And so this put them in a situation, you have the figures on the screen, I'm not going to read them all, but 77% of migrant workers who return home believe they will have to migrate again. So that's really one of the starting points we've been building our vision and mission upon. So very quickly, a testimony from one of our students being a team leader today too. So she says, I'm a Filipina single mom. I had been working for 6 years abroad to support my son, but had nothing for my own future. So Uplifters is a nonprofit based in Hong Kong. What we do is that we enable migrant domestic workers in Southeast Asia to transform their lives. And we do that by combining the power of online education with community support, really with the end goal of making their migration successful. Again, I'm not going to go through all the programs maybe for today. I'll just focus on how we give access to education at scale, which is the core of our model. So in short, we believe uploading content online is not enough to really reach marginalized communities, such as domestic workers. So since we started, we've really tried hard to overcome accessibility and flexibility issues. That was really at the center of our reflections, and designing online education tools that would suit these communities' really unique situation. So we have one signature program, Prepare for the Future, and this one combines money management and personal growth. And so far, we've been enrolling 7,700 of domestic workers, also working on the impact, of course, not only looking at the rich, but I'll be discussing a little bit more in detail the impact, some impact figures later on. So back to how we do things. So our programs are easy to use through social media that our participants actually already use on a daily basis, mainly Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp. Can explain a little bit later more. So they're accessible through very simple smartphones. They don't need to have a high internet connection to not only connect, but to study. They are also self-paced with asynchronous interactions, so they can just connect whenever they have time to do so, taking into account their very limited time off. And they also receive daily reminders through Facebook, through a chatbot that we created on Facebook. Another important point is that we have, so we say they study online, but they don't study alone. So we have this peer coaching system, which is, we believe, one of the main reasons why we have the impact we have. So it means that some of our alumni are trained to support the new students. So they go through a train-the-trainer program, and then they will facilitate discussions in WhatsApp online class chats, where a group of 15 to 20 students will share their learning from the course and share their experience. So they will also be learning from each other on the top of learning from the content of the course itself. And what it does is that it creates positive peer pressure and really boosts students' motivation to complete the course. So the result of it is that we have a high completion ratio. So as many of you might already know, most online education platform, 90 to 95% of people never complete the online course they enrolled in. And I'm talking about the general population and like the standard platforms such as Coursera, for instance. So the tricky part again with online education is really to put not to put some content out there, but really making sure that we will have our students completing the course. And so we're happy to have a 50% completion ratio, especially knowing that our students are very busy. They do not have control over their schedule. They have very low digital literacy, and they only access the course through a simple smartphones on a very limited data plan most often. So our impact also translates with 84% of our participants reporting that Uplifters has had a major impact on their lives. And then when it comes to fostering good financial habits, which is really the key objective of our programs, I'm just giving you two figures, and I'm happy to discuss it more afterward. So we measured a 2 times increase in our students' confidence in managing their finances well. And 6 months after the course, 71% of our alumni saved money compared with 43% before. So we have still Nelly saying we are in 1 year after she joined Uplifters, she was able to start building a house, and she's also stressing the importance for her of being able to access something online while she couldn't go to face-to-face courses. So we often say that what's different about us is the desire that we have to actually not to choose between going wide and going deep. So we really want to create a long-lasting impact, but at scale. So we have a fourfold approach. I already mentioned briefly the community-led and peer support model, as well as what we do to grow accessibility. We also design our courses based on cognitive and behavioral psychology to make sure change actually happens. So looking at the attitudes, to go back to one of the former presentations. And finally, we have learned that to be impactful, programs need to address the whole person. So that's why we really take a holistic approach to education, combining financial education with personal development, more and more with mental well-being. And we are also having in mind to create new programs, initiative to make the return home successful. So when it comes to opportunities, so we are closing our first strategic plan. We've just finalized what we want to be working on in the next 3 years. And among our key goals for 2023-2025 is really scaling. So as I said, we've already enrolled almost 8,000, sorry, not yet 80, hopefully one day, since we started, but the population is huge. There is, really a need for financial empowerment. So again, in Hong Kong alone, there are 350,000. So now the situation we find ourselves in is that now that we have built the foundations to scale, we really want to make the most of this scaling opportunity. And we feel that to do that, we need to continue to increase access to education and to use technology to do so. So very briefly, how we plan in the next coming years to grow accessibility. So we have our current student management IT system that will need to be adjusted so we can reach out to domestic workers in other parts of the world. That will be a first point. We also think about improving our courses format and pace and using audio formats more and more. So we try to avoid using video formats just because we don't want to create some sort of inequality, knowing that some don't have a good enough internet connection to actually access videos. So that's really, one of the conclusions we came to, thinking about accessibility. Our content was available in English only until now, so we are happy to now have the signature course that I just mentioned being translated in Bahasa Indonesia. So we hope to have the ability to reach out to more Indonesian domestic workers. We will also investigate if we need to provide our programs in other languages than Bahasa Indonesia and English. And also most of the courses that we have online could actually be adapted to other migrant communities. So this is also something we could look at. Now, looking at the challenges, the situation now, like at the end of this strategic planning period, is quite different for us as it was at its starts in 2020. So just to give you a better sense of the growth. So in 2020, we enrolled 2,800 new students. Again, I'm speaking only about our signature program, and that was 4 times more than the year before. But in 2021, this number dropped to 2,400 and dropped again to 2,000 in 2022. So we've encountered challenges that we did not expect as we were trying to lay those foundations to scale. And I'm mindful of the time. I'm gonna quickly go through those challenges. So first, what we feel now is that this is not because people need financial education that they necessarily want it. So people hesitate to invest their time in it. It's really an effort that has not necessarily clear immediate benefits. And it requires domestic workers to also overcome their fear and guilt related to their current situation. It would also require them to have the capacity to project themselves in the future, which is not to be taken for granted. And so we've discussed with other NGOs, and it feels like this challenge remains the same, whether the program is online or offline. So we feel that we did lift some barriers to access financial education, but we probably didn't do enough to attract new students to join and did not generate traction after the initial early adopters enrolled. So we need to diversify our sources of new beneficiaries. We're relying a lot on Facebook paid advertisement, and that is becoming too expensive. And it's not going to be sustainable for us in the long term. So that's one of the challenge, really. How do we make financial education desired? The second one that we've identified is, so as I explained, we made the conscious decision to build our solutions through Facebook. As we know, it would be difficult to reach them at scale otherwise. So we assumed that they wouldn't use emails or use an app in a consistent way. But it made us dependent on the change in Facebook policies. So, for example, we already had to rebuild our chatbot 4 times. So this is obviously very time consuming. And so we're thinking about different options. We want to make the programs as easy as possible to enroll and to follow, but at the same time, it is difficult for some of the people to reach. So it's easy to, they're easier to reach going through the platforms that they already use, but it could be that at some point, juggling with the different supports that we use, like the chatbot on Facebook, the class chat on WhatsApp, the e-learning platform that is hosting the content, can be also a little bit of a challenge for them, especially for those that are not necessarily the most willing to learn. The third challenge, and the last one we identified, is that it's difficult to keep people engaged. Even if we are happy with the completion ratio that we have, it's very difficult to do that when they never have a chance to interact with others in real life. So that's an assumption that we're making. So our team leaders, those alumni who are supporting new students, can also get overwhelmed with the time it takes to facilitate the class chats. or sometimes it also has an emotional impact on them to see some of the students not really starting the course or leaving the class chat. So it requires a lot of efforts from them to keep the class chat lively. And yet our model really relies on these women helping us to have this peer support component. So my conclusion is that from our experience, also from some of the reflections we conducted jointly with other similar e-learning programs, it seems that there is no ideal e-solution to empower financially at scale. But there are some routes that we would be super happy to explore. So following what I just shared, we identified 2 key research areas that we feel we could hugely benefit from at the stage we're in. So we'd love to get scientific answers, backup, context to these 2 main questions. The first one being, what are the key barriers for migrant communities to educate themselves online on money management? So again, like we feel we identified some, but maybe there are others that we are struggling against. And so how do we make digital education on finances accessible and desired, not only accessible? And the other one is really about community building. What are the best practices? How do we make sure that we can build a robust peer support system? Because we strongly believe this is what helps students to complete the course, to be able to identify to their peers who've already been there. But how do we make that sustainable? So we would obviously welcome any opportunities for collaboration on this. So here is the contact of the organization, but of course you can contact me directly by email. And I thank you for your attention. And I'm sorry that I was a little bit beyond 15 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Camille. That was a really informative presentation as well. I'll just quickly ask you 2 questions that we have, and then we can open up to more people. Okay, so one question is, do you think that your program, I guess this is the question, is it reducing the debt rate, I guess? So do people have less debt after they've completed your course?
So that's one of the impact indicator that we're actually struggling measuring, just because starting with having a good baseline is very difficult to get. So I don't want to go too much into detail, but we've been working with some Hong Kong universities to really think about how to best ask questions to this community, so we would get the most accurate answers to have this baseline. And so far it proved difficult. So on the debt indicator, I can't guarantee that we're having an impact in reducing it. Some other indicators we're having good.
So another question is also about their savings, the percent of their savings the percent of their salaries that they save.
So I don't have the answer to the percentage of the salary that they save. We know that they save more after the course than before. We also know that they keep saving long time after the course. So we ask them the same questions again 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year after the course ends. Same questions that we asked at the very beginning. We also know that they are more in the process of building emergency saving, which is one of the key things that we are insisting in the course. So it's not only about saving, but it's really about kind of prioritizing what we want to be saving for.
Right. And then another question is about the Indonesian community. When you say Indonesians, do you mean those who moved to Singapore and the Middle East, or do you mean internal migrants within Indonesia?
No. Thanks for the question. No, we're speaking about Indonesian domestic workers who moved from Indonesia to Hong Kong or Singapore.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. So what
Yeah.
I'm going to do next, thank you very much to all of our presenters for really fascinating presentations. I learned a lot. The next session, if you like, is really meant to be an open discussion. I'm sorry, we really are running late, but I think it was fascinating to listen to everyone. So anybody who's in the audience who would like to join the open discussion, I think what Kathy is going to do is either promote you directly because you already indicated that you wanted to be part of the open discussion. But if you aren't promoted, I think the idea is you put your hand up, your Zoom hand up, and then you will get promoted. So that way you can just then unmute yourself and speak. So while we're waiting for people to enter, I think people can still hear us. So maybe we'll have Catherine, if you would like to unmute yourself and speak. Catherine
Thank
Laws.
you. Thank you very much. My question is to Camille. So thank you for that very interesting presentation, because us in the International Labor Organization, we have been trying also as well to conduct financial literacy trainings online the past few years. And so I'm quite curious in some of your lessons learned, and maybe more specifically, could you please share a little bit more about how you have been integrating these you mentioned community-led approaches to your online courses, and how has that helped and hindered the implementation of the courses? Thank you.
Okay, so just to make sure I understood the question well, so it's about how we integrate the community support, the peer support component of our programs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we did that at the very, very start. So the idea was that we wanted to have these women, students, being able to identify to someone they could relate to. So these women, they're the alumni, they go through a train program, which is a combination of an online course itself called Become a Leader. So we give them the basics about what being a good peer leader is in general. And we also provide them with very specific guidance on how they can facilitate the learning of their new students. So they are not teachers, they are really facilitators in the sense that they will boost their motivation to actually connect every day and to do the challenges. Like the course itself is really action oriented. And also what they will be doing is that they will be drawing on the different experiences sharing that are happening on the class chat. So it's really, again, like they are not teaching, they are not repeating what the course actually teaches, but they're helping these students to actually learn from each other. For example, if it's about saving tips, they will be sharing their own saving tips. So that's how we do it. And then internally, we have what we call a Lighthouse Team Leaders Program, where these women, they have the possibility to go through a program where they get more benefits as they stay with us. So they start with team leaders, and then they become gold team leaders and diamond team leaders. And so the longer they've stayed with us, and the easier it is for them to access other training opportunities. We also have a system of recognition of their commitment on social media that they can use. And at the very top of this lighthouse, we have mentors. So for now, there are 10, both working in Hong Kong and Singapore, and they are very much part of the core team. So together with the staff, they form what we call the core team, and they are advising continuously how we can improve the program. So we've been created this feedback loop that is very fluid, where we can get feedback from what's happening on the class chat, and from what would be the most pressing issues to address in the future from them. And so the second question you had was the impact of it. So we definitely, the completion ratio is the result of this peer support system, and the impact that we have is that it's auto-fitting. So the students are extremely grateful for the support that they've received from these team leaders, and will be more likely to commit themselves once they're alumni to become part of this team leaders team. And this is how we're growing the community. So it's really part of the DNA of the organization.
All right, thank you. I think we have another hand up. Nurina?
Thank you for the panelists. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to get a sense in terms of the migrant workers, to what extent the kind of programs needed are more like at the extensive or intensive margins. I just want to get a sense in terms of migrant workers, the percentage of them, they are not yet having like any formal access to financial services, and to what extent it's more a matter of, yes, they do have a bank account, but we just have to enlighten them to use more financial services. They can really improve in terms of, yeah, how they navigate their future after being like a domestic workers overseas, for instance.
Sorry, but whom is your question? Is your question also to Camille?
I think to Camille, and also like to the other panelists who look at what kind of like programs they can create for domestic workers. For instance, like from Savor Asia, to what extent like they have any thoughts in terms of, like the percentage of migrant workers with access to bank accounts. So probably it's more appealing for them to use the remittance comparison if they want to send it to digital remittance services, or to what extent there's still like some ways to allocate information if they want to pursue more like a counter, a physical counter, if they want to send remittances.
I wonder if Jonathan has any thoughts on how many people would rather go to the physical counters than use the app, I suppose.
Yeah, this can vary quite considerably from country to country, and also the digital literacy that the migrant may have already, and the kind of familiarization with jumping to another app, and so on. I think it's like so, for example, if you're looking at somewhere like Malaysia or Singapore, where app usage might be quite high, there's a lot. We're finding there's people will ask us, and they will kind of often contact us via Messenger and so on, and have questions about kind of looking to reinforce what we're kind of advising on the site, but also making it clear that they there are other services that they might use, or perhaps they may be using informal services and want to sort of understand the benefits of switching to formal. It can be this is mentioned before the last question. We look to include as much information as possible, so we're not trying to just include information about digital services. I guess the reality is that they're obviously growing, and it's become, and particularly over COVID, that's become a major area. But it really does depend on what is going to benefit the user, and how their receiver can actually collect the money. So we're sort of always available. We have community coordinators that manage the social media, and can also address questions and so on that come in Burmese, Bahasa, Indonesia, and Khmer. So they're sort of there to help, to support. And I guess also with that, we produce a lot of videos and sort of social media content that kind of guides people in an appropriate manner. But whilst there is a benefit towards digital, but it's most definitely not telling people, not to use other services. The main thing we're trying to ensure that people are using regulated formal services as much as possible. And if, any of you have been in, I was in Singapore for the first time for a few months ago, going through Lucky Plaza or Road on a Sunday, and tell you there's still tens of thousands of Filipinos still sending money in person, queuing up and still doing that on a Sunday. So yes, there's more services out there, it's more digital, but it's, we're a long way off from seeing the cash, kind of bricks and mortar stores still being really important. Sorry.
I think another, sorry to cut you off. I think another thing to keep in mind perhaps is also that it's not just about the migrant deciding whether she wants to send it using method A or method B. It's also about what's going to happen at the receiving end, where often you might be sending it to somebody who doesn't have the flexibility to use the app at their end. Or, I was just in the Philippines in the field where the same migrant is sending remittances to the son and to the father, but the father and the son are both accessing the money using different ways. Because the father goes and cashes it, at the shop, but the son just uses GCash and then just is happy to pay the 5 pesos to convert it, But then even the son is not able to actually use GCash as GCash because he doesn't buy anything that is sold using GCash, right? So, there are many steps in this remittance process. And I think rather than just looking at money-wise, what is cheaper, I think we have to think about convenience and accessibility at the other end as well.
Yeah, I think about what you just said about GCash is very important. And it's something we see in many parts of the world where, there's a lot of excitement that there is mobile wallets and this is helping some, but it's not, if people still have to have it going primarily to go and cash out, and then they're paying and they don't think about the, the cost that is involved with cashing out. It might be, it's going to be a bit lower generally, but it still adds up. If you keep going and just take out, $20 at a time, before you know it, you might as well collect it in cash in the first place. Right. So there's, the onus does fall to some degree on the mobile network operators in that case to, educate people domestically about the, broader financial services that are available through their mobile money networks. But that's one of the things obviously we're trying to do as well, is kind of like, help to explain and, guide people in that way. But no two networks are the same, let alone two countries. So there's but the trend is moving there. But it's it is, people are still not necessarily optimizing the ways that they can collect money.
I'd like to also kind of discuss perhaps related to financial education. There were some really interesting questions raised and some issues that came up. So, for example, Fenella pointing out that for some of the more complex financial decisions that people have to make, it's not about awareness and it's not about numeracy. It's really about whether people's attitudes have changed or not. And then she got asked a question about how do you think about broader financial knowledge, including attitudes? And I think an interesting, obviously there's the question of how do you measure attitudes, where immediately I was thinking, well, if I teach somebody that having a bank account is a good idea, and then I ask them in a survey, what do you think about having a bank account? I think they're probably going to say it's a good idea. But I don't know if I've actually changed their attitude. So how do you really, these things are more implicit, and how do you actually measure them accurately is something that I wonder about as a researcher. But then also, how do you change attitudes, I think? And is it as straightforward as telling people it's a good idea, or is there something more deeper that we need to be addressing? And, I think Uplifters has this broader, you look at personal development. And so I'm wondering, is that the answer, that we need to focus on the whole person, or are there more targeted things we need to do to change people's attitudes? I wonder if anybody has anything to say to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in very briefly. Yeah, for sure. What we've observed is that, how regardless of how good budgeting skills could be for someone, for instance, if the person does not have the self-confidence, if the person does not have the ability to project herself, she will not necessarily use these budgeting skills. So I'm just using that as an example to say that really for us, it goes hand in hand together. And that's why we're combining both in the course, and it's really combined. So it's not like one chapter on mental health and another one on, saving or investments. So I think really looking at the person as a whole can help. Now, when it comes to changing attitudes, we've been looking a bit into behavioral change sciences and conclusion. And so you have different things you can do to prompt people into action. And usually they say that you have three key things you want to take into consideration. One is the ability, so skills and knowledge. So they do need to know how to budget for sure to start with. Two is the motivation. And so again, this motivation, will it come from, looking at someone else doing it, or will it come from within? The more it comes from within and the longer the impact will be. And the third component is what they call the environment. And this is what we're trying to create with this community peer pressure aspect of our work. Is really, they're always using, you want to start running every day, every morning before your first coffee, then just put your running shoes in front of your coffee machine, and that's going to help. And so really creating an environment, creating a support system, so they're constantly reminded of, the importance of, opening a bank account or saving. And it comes back to my point, like there is really a gap in between knowing how important it is for me to be financially educated, then wanting to do it, and then actually doing it. This is where we need to find ways to, close the gap.
It's really interesting. Fenella, were you going to say something too?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that question that you posed kind of in a different way, which is that I think part of it is related to take up. So there's been lots of questions here about, for instance, with the Savor Asia app and with this app from Uplifters, what's the take up and how do we get people to use these tools? And I think if you look at the literature in financial education, take up has actually been in many studies have been quite low. And that kind of signals some indication that people don't really find this topic interesting. And it's still kind of debatable. I mean, there's still a debate in academic literature on kind of, how to increase take up. I think there's a part of the literature that says that we should focus actually on more kind of like teachable moments. Kind of like, for example, in the context of migration, kind of the teachable moment is before they leave, right? And so when you kind of focus on a teachable moment, I'm still not answering your question of like how we can change attitudes, but in a teachable moment, kind of people are more open and attitudes are probably more likely to be changed. And so I think kind of in the migration decision, kind of, doing the if I had an hypothesis, I would hypothesize that, financial education programs would have a lot larger effect before migration than if it's provided before migration rather than after migration. So it's kind of an indirect way of kind of answering your question, Sujata, but I think kind of like focusing on kind of when it's provided, it's also kind of part of the way we can think about kind of how attitudes can be changed.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I know
Sorry,
Tina. Yeah, go ahead.
Just briefly on that point, Fenella, I think I agree. I mean, obviously the fortitude of working with ILO and partners for some pre-departure in some countries, and that has been effective. Is getting them at the right moment. And so that is an important part of our approach, is to do as much in-person activities as we can. But obviously you can't reach millions of people that way face to face, at least not now, not right now. So, on top of that, social media, online engagement is important. You can do around certain events and kind of national days and so on, but it's you've got to be, and Camille's been saying the same thing as well. You've got to, it's got to have constant engagement and and not just be kind of focusing on one particular topic. And that's something we're very mindful of. And I think this is where we can see the opportunity by having a much more kind of holistic financial education service, rather than just, here you go, compare remittances, great, you've saved money, then you might not need to come back. Obviously we want to, encourage that, the regular engagement and so on. Okay.
That's great. I mean, I want to say just one last thing, but Aiko and our project actually does exactly focus on, we're trying to focus on these teachable moments and also early on in the migration when we think that we might, these kinds of interventions might be more effective. But there is a question. I think Kijin Kim has had their hand up for quite a while. Yes.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. So my name is Kijin. I'm colleague of Aiko at ADB. So part of my research is migration and remittances as well. So I think so my personal question, one of the question is about informal channel actually. So does financial education cover the topic of informal channel like Hawala? So it's kind of prevalent in South Asia for a region, although it is considered illegal. But I think this is quite important because the reason why we have robust remittances is part of the reason is the informal channel, because some governments actually provided incentives for migrants to use official channels like banks and digital channels. So this issue might be also important for policymakers and statistics capturing, so that the actual money flows into the countries should go through the official channels. So I'm wondering whether this is relevant issues in terms of financial education for migrant workers. Thank you.
Anybody want to take that up?
So I guess your question was whether, if I understand your question correctly, is kind of to what extent financial education programs are addressing kind of formalization in some way of like sending of remittances. Was that it?
Anything related to I think my understanding is that it is considered illegal in many parts of the countries, but I know probably many South Asian migrant workers from South Asia, they should be using some informal channels. So I'm just wondering, anything related to informal channels is covered by financial education for them.
Aiko. Oh, sorry.
Aiko.
Can't hear you, Aiko. Can't hear you. No, I don't know what happened. Maybe John goes first. Aiko, you need to fix your microphone. Oh, there you are.
No.
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 No, no. Do you want to rejoin the audio? Yeah, Jonathan, maybe Aiko can rejoin. Aiko?
How about this? Now it's okay.
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. So in general, many of the government financial training, pre-departure orientation actually does not encourage, and they would send the discouraging message for some good reasons. One is that there are so many fraudulent activities, and they get quite a few reports that this Hawala system has not resulted in migrant losing fund, and they have no way of proving that they have sent. So this is kind of a risks. So take a risk, send, okay. But I would also stress that for some of the remittance route, because of the, for example, difference in the formal to informal exchange rate, or because of the some of the limitation that the government has in terms of how they can send remittances to their countries, actually informal are rational choice. Then the government cannot really they would send the discouraging remarks and so on, but it remains that they need to have a better formal service to compete it. So I think that's where the government really has to work harder. The sign is that please do not send, but if there is a better option.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So
yes,
just
Jonathan.
Just quickly to add to that, for the most part, we always advise people to use regulated formal services, but there's certain instances, and particularly what we've had with Myanmar, especially early last year after the military takeover, there was quite a period where there was very little formal services coming in at all. So during that period, like if you're not, for those that aren't aware, I mean, at the best of times, informal services are considered to be pretty much like formal. Everybody's aware of them. It's very, very well structured. We've actually had requests in the past to list informal providers on there, so that established. But so, what we've done from time to time is, not necessarily comparing them, but providing that advice offline or through Messenger and so on. So if people want, have got questions, we can at least advise and explain, well, this is available at the moment. Right now, this company is offering this and at this rate and so on. But it's a very challenging situation. I just recently did some work with World Bank earlier this year, looking at Thailand, Myanmar. I believe it's going to be published. I'm not sure if any World Bank audience members are here today, but that really kind of looks especially at this issue and in a corridor where it's obviously very very rife. So thank you.
Thank you. Tina, you have your hand up, and I also know that there's a question for Jonathan about Saver Learning in the question and answer, but Tina also had a question about Saver, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Sujata. Actually, I'd like to also respond to your question about change in financial behavior. I think I'm from Enrich. We're also based in Hong Kong. We also do financial education to migrant domestic workers alongside uplifters. One thing I'd say is there are also studies, and I have to get back to this, I have to verify, but I believe in that study, it says that only about 2% or smaller is the impact of financial education to a person to achieve the desired financial outcome. And at Enrich, through the years, as we do financial education, we realize that this time there needs to be a change in the financial behavior of the migrant domestic workers. And one thing I guess that may affect that is there's cultural entrenchment on financial literacy, knowledge, behavior of the migrant domestic workers. This is not taught in the family. And so as soon as they arrive overseas and this is offered to them, there are things that they need to learn and unlearn. What we also discovered is that there is also a disconnect between the knowledge and behavior of the migrant worker, and the family members. While the workers are being empowered, learning new things, and beginning to develop these skills, families are not. And so then that also there's no alignment. So it makes it more challenging to also achieve the desired financial outcome. I'm also interested now as we look at our programs and our interventions, how accountability actually takes place. And if we can actually look at accountability among the migrant domestic workers that actually take or are taking financial education. Because in the end, it's them having to take action. And from the participants that we see, we know and they get back to us and we see from data that there are improvements, there are changes, but then there are setbacks. They go back to the cycle of debt. There are certain, they falter, they fall. And so what would be the best approach on that? That's a question as well from me. Again, what I would be interested is actually how do we measure accountability, or how do we actually incorporate accountability among the migrant workers who are taking financial education? My question to Jonathan would be actually the success measure. How do you measure success of the app? And if you are actually implementing it, and as Fenella said, what's the uptake so far?
Yeah, so in terms of sorry, I'm not you can hear me. Yeah, we see measuring website usage and app downloads, and kind of particular function use. So what we found is with certain areas of the site, like the comparison tool is obviously an area where people come and compare, but there's been certain things that have been very, very popular. The overtime calculator that we have in Malaysia has been has been used by probably half of the people who have actually come onto the platform. And we can see, the stickiness of people using it as they're obviously through there and actually learning that being paid appropriately obviously can have a profound difference on understanding overtime rates and so on. So so yeah, it's the way we measure it's the engagement, but both the downloads, but also the sort of returning usage. And going forward, this is one of the reasons why we're sort of expanding the features and so on, because we want to ensure that there's as much stickiness, so as much kind of functions that people will use. So tools that are very simple to use. Since we've had the multilingual app, we've seen more engagement on the different functions that we have on there. And I think, but that can vary. It's not that's really relevant for, say, Myanmar, Cambodia migrants, but Indonesians still seem to come onto the website more than the app, for example.
There's a follow-up question, perhaps, or it's been in here for a while, but the question is, what is the progress with Saver Learning, and is there a timeline when that will be available?
So early next year is what I can clarify. So I think we can welcome to have a sort of offline conversation about that. But yes, no, this will be coming soon in 2023.
Okay.
And so whilst we are building it, just to be clear, I mean, we're building this as a global product because we have other platforms. We have Saver Africa, Saver Americas, and Saver Pacific. But for Saver Asia, it will be because we're sort of further ahead in our journey. We've got more partnerships and a lot more kind of content on there now. So that's very much the focus in terms of the focus group activities and getting the right balance of courses and so on. So it'll be it'd be great to engage with everybody here today and understand what you, for example, might want to see. And also, I mean, just to reinforce as well, there's we've got our particular focus, but we're looking really to sort of point people towards using other services, whether it's digital or offline, where it might be that there's more particularly extensive education that we might not be providing, and particularly where there's on the ground activities going on. So if we can kind of connect with organizations that are running trainings that are taking place, obviously I'm learning a lot about what's going on in Hong Kong today, then that's definitely of interest to us, and hopefully obviously to other organizations. And collaborations is what's going to help the people the most.
Perfect, thank you. Are there more questions or comments anybody would like to bring up? And I think this question of how do you get people to want financial education that Camille raised is kind of tied in with how do you change people's attitudes. I think all of this is probably different aspects of the same question. And I think one of the issues that researchers, like for example, Fenella described the randomized experiment, right? And a lot of the research in economics has looked at, how do we really know what the impact is? Because I think often the concern we have as researchers is, well, the people who come and seek out financial education are obviously more motivated to get it than all of the others who don't. And so then even if we say, and it's great if we can say that, they are saving more or that they are more empowered now, but, if this had not been available to them, maybe they would have gone and got empowered some other way, so it's hard to really parse out what the effect of the program is versus other things that might be going on at the same time. But I mean, yes, what I like especially about Fenella's presentation is we generally think that in randomized controlled trials, people have found that financial education has mixed impacts, right? We're not really sure when it works and when it doesn't work, but at least your research helps us understand that, well, there's certain dimensions that might be more effective on certain outcomes than others. So that's at least trying to dig under the shell and under the hood and trying to understand how things work. There's also a point that Juyoung is making about whether training should be given. You're saying it should be given perhaps a few months after they've arrived, since they're likely to be overwhelmed at pre-departure and just after arrival. Yeah, I guess that is also an important point. But the other point that I thought was interesting was also about, a couple of people have said this now, about how if the family is not in sync with the migrant and we're only training one side, then, Juyoung is also saying that maybe over time that gap even widens as you educate the family, educate the migrant, but not the family. This is part of what I'm doing while I'm here in the Philippines for a month, is trying to track the families of the migrants who are in our study in Hong Kong and trying to understand both sides of the story, because the hope is to eventually build a linked lives study where we can try and understand both sides. So this has been really fascinating. We're way over time. I apologize for that, but thank you very much for staying. And also, we very much hope that you will come again tomorrow morning. This part of the world. And we'll have another session with presentations then too. Thank you very much. I'm
Thank
going
you.
to end this
Thank
now.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so
It's
much.
been a lovely discussion.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
Albert. Thank
Yeah.
you. Bye, Aiko.